Okay, so next up we are talking about the Solanaceae family or the tomato family, but this is a very popular plant family, and I don't know whether to call it the tomato family, the pepper family, or the potato family because they're all part of this group. Mind you, potatoes, I just want to say a quick word about potatoes, are the poor, unfortunate, estranged member of this family because they don't follow any of the rules and they're never invited to any family gatherings and we don't start them from seed. So that's all I have to say about that. um, so it includes, like I said, tomatoes. It includes peppers, eggplants, and ground cherries, which if you haven't heard of ground cherries, let me introduce you. These are one of my absolute favorite things to plant. They are so delicious. It's like a cherry tomato, but it's got more of like a sweet pineapple-y type flavor, and it's also encased in a papery husk. And the plant grows not at all like tomato. It's a lot lower, and they readily self-seed. So they're easy. They're just delightful. So this is one of the things that I'm going to be starting today. Now, ground cherries are supposed to be started about 8 to 10 weeks before last frost. Same with peppers and eggplants. They need a little bit more time, and especially the peppers and the eggplants need also generally some supplementary heat. So it means that you can either put them in a warm spot under your lights or by the window, or have a heat mat if you're like me and your house is quite chilly in March because you don't want to use the heater anymore. Okay, so that's for peppers and eggplants. Peppers, we would start eight to 10 weeks. And just make sure with all of these rules that you're double checking on your package because the seed growers know better than anybody how best to make these seeds really thrive and be viable. So, yeah, so always read your seed packages. But if you end up with one like this, like I have, something that you've saved or whatnot, then the rules of thumb are probably a safe bet. Now, with tomatoes, there's all different kinds. There's Roma type tomatoes, which are more like for paste. There's like the big beefsteak ones. I have one here, Wenzel beefsteak tomato is the variety I have right here. There's also cherry tomatoes, all different kinds. I have these kind of pear ones, and then I have black cherries. Honestly, I have ordered seeds from seed companies in the past that only sell tomatoes. There are so many varieties of them, and you can go down a crazy rabbit hole. It is super fun to read about all the histories, and I'm talking about heirloom seeds specifically in this instance. Read about all the histories of how it was passed down through the generations, how it got its name, and it's a whole tomato thing. So I definitely encourage you to look into it more. But for now, I just want to talk about how I plant my tomatoes because I don't plant them in trays. Tomatoes, for me, I found are very successful in paper pots or something where they can really send out a ton of roots. And actually what I do is you can check the paper pot making video for this. But what I do is I fill up the pots only halfway and then I plant my tomato seed in it. I let it germinate. And then when it's come up above the rim of the pot, then I fill more soil in because you'll notice if you look at your tomato seedlings that the stem, it's got little hairs on it and those hairs will actually turn into roots if they're buried. So it makes for a good, sturdy, strong plant. Also, another technique that a lot of people use is when they plant their tomatoes, they plant them in sideways. So they actually take it and it's pointing up straight and then they lay it down so that, like I said, all of those hairs along the stems get buried and then they become roots and then the tomato just corrects itself and starts growing back up towards the sky. So that's a really cool tomato tip. So ground cherries and peppers, like I said, is what we're going to be planting today. Ground cherries are something that they grow quite slowly to get started, but they can, if you just scatter the seeds outside, they very easily self-sow. And these are itty bitty little babies. They're very tiny little seeds. And because I have an abundance of them, I'm going to go ahead and put 2 per cell. So I got my handy dandy tool here again, just making 2 little divots. Now this, because the ground cherries are nice and yellow, the seeds, I mean, they're easy to see that you've planted them. Unlike the old onions that are so dark that they just disappear when they get into the soil. So you just drop them in. These seeds are so tiny that I might be tempted to use the toothpick technique, which is a technique I use to start teeny tiny perennial seeds. And but for the most part, if I can pinch it, I will, because it's just easier that way. So I'm going to go ahead. I've done a row here. And I'll just use my little tool to tuck them in. And then make sure I label it. So the general rule of thumb with seeds is that the smaller the seed, the more shallow you plant it. I'm actually going to snap my popsicle stick in half because then I have two labels because I'm cheap. The rule of thumb is the smaller the seed, the farther up it has to be. So a lot of the really teeny tiny seeds, or especially if you notice your seed is flat, it's because it lays on the surface. So this is just, one of these instances where we can see how things are working in nature. And then if we can understand the reasoning behind how something grows, then it's easier to commit to memory the different rules about how to get it started ourselves in our own environments. So the ground cherries are very small seeds. What actually happens if it was completely left unattended in nature is that the ground cherry in its papery husk would fall off of the bottom part of the plant because they kind of hang on the bottom. It would just fall to the ground. And then if an animal didn't get to it first, what the seed, the fruit actually breaks down and the husk stays. And then if you leave it in your garden, you can observe this, but it ends up being the papery husk with the seeds kind of broken down in there. And then they'll just kind of go into the soil. So they don't need to be buried very deep. Now, peppers, on the other hand, are a bit bigger of a seed. I'm sure you've all seen pepper seeds before in your peppers that you get from the grocery store. So these ones, you want to plant them a little bit deeper. They look like a bit like a bigger ground cherry seed. So when I plant my peppers, I plant them one at a time, one per cell. And then you'll want to pot them up into bigger pots later on. So as I mentioned before, peppers like to have a nice warm spot to germinate. And we want to be starting these about 10 weeks before last frost. I have a few different varieties here. And these ones you just can plunk them right in. The bigger seeds are always the easiest. And that's really all there is to it. So I hope that you have a lot of fun planting your Solenaceae family seedlings and try all different kinds, all different types of tomatoes, all different types of peppers, and definitely give the ground cherries a try because they are one of my definite favorites.